Back when I was 28, living in Austin, Texas, I thought I had the whole online dating thing figured out. I'd been navigating apps like Bumble and Tinder for a while, going on dates that ranged from awkward to surprisingly decent. But that was my thing back then, a way to meet people in a city buzzing with live music, craft breweries, and endless opportunities for connection. These days, I don't touch those apps, thank God. But this story isn't about the happy ending that eventually came my way. No, this is about a night that went off the rails in ways I still think about 6 years later. It started on a Thursday night in the middle of spring. I'd just gotten home from my job as a copywriter and was half watching reruns of Parks and Recreation with a beer in hand. Scrolling through Tinder was more of a habit than anything else, a way to pass time while unwinding. I wasn't expecting much, but then I matched with her. Her name was Lily, and her profile stood out immediately. Most profiles were filled with vague lines like, "Just ask me," or endless selfies with filters. But Lily's bio was thoughtful. She mentioned her love of cult classic horror films, her obsession with dogs, and her dream of one day opening a bakery. Her pictures weren't over the top either, just a mix of casual shots. One of her hiking, one with her dog, and one of her laughing at what looked like a backyard barbecue. She seemed normal, approachable, and frankly just refreshing. I messaged her first, and to my surprise, the conversation flowed effortlessly. She was quick-witted, sarcastic in a way I loved, and had a deep knowledge of obscure horror movies, which I'd grown up watching with my older brother. Over the course of a few days, we texted back and forth, joking about bad 80s slashers and sharing favorite movie quotes. By the time we decided to meet in person, I felt like I already knew her. Lily suggested we meet at this dive bar called the Rusty Anchor on the east side of town. It wasn't a part of Austin I usually hung out in, but I figured why not? Maybe she was one of those people who loved the offbeat charm of hole-in-the-wall places. The bar had decent Yelp reviews, and I was curious to see if the vibe matched her personality. I arrived about 10 minutes early. The bar was tucked between a pawn shop and an auto repair garage, its neon sign flickering like something out of a noir film. Inside, the place was dimly lit, with mismatched furniture, a pool table in the corner, and a jukebox playing classic rock. A handful of patrons were scattered around, nursing beers and chatting quietly. The smell of stale beer and fried food hung in the air. I ordered a whiskey soda and waited at a small table near the back, my nerves buzzing. First dates always made me a little anxious, but this time, I felt more excitement than dread. When Lily walked in, I recognized her instantly. She looked just like her photos, blonde hair pulled into a loose braid, green eyes that seemed to catch the light, and a leather jacket that added a touch of edge to her otherwise laid-back style. "Hey," she said, flashing a smile as she slid into the seat across from me. She ordered a gin and tonic, and from the first sip, the conversation flowed as easily as it had over text. We talked about the worst dates we'd ever been on. Hers involved a guy who brought his mom, debated whether The Thing, or Alien, was the better sci-fi horror film, and even swapped ghost stories. It was the kind of conversation that felt like it could go on forever. For the first time in a long time, I thought this could actually go somewhere. About an hour into the date, Lily leaned forward, her voice dropping a little. "Want to keep this going somewhere quieter?" she asked, her green eyes sparkling. I hesitated for just a second. Normally, I wasn't the type to go back to someone's place on a first date. But the way she asked, so casual yet confident, made it hard to say no. Plus, the drinks had loosened me up, and I was really enjoying her company. "Sure," I said, smiling. We left the bar and started walking. Lily said her apartment was only a few blocks away, and as we strolled through the quiet streets, the conversation continued. But something about the night started to feel off. Maybe it was the way the streetlights buzzed faintly, casting long shadows on the cracked sidewalks, or the fact that we seemed to be heading deeper into a part of town I didn't recognize. Still, I brushed it off. It was probably just my nerves. Her apartment building was tucked behind a shuttered laundromat. It was old, 3 stories of faded brick with iron railings that looked like they hadn't been painted in decades. The entryway smelled like mildew, and the hallway lights flickered sporadically, giving everything a faintly eerie glow. I followed her up a creaky staircase to the 2nd floor, where she unlocked her door with a key that looked almost as old as the building itself. The second we stepped inside, I noticed a peculiar smell. It wasn't the musty odor from the hallway. This was different, sour, almost like spoiled milk mixed with something metallic. I tried to ignore it as Lily gestured me toward a corduroy couch in the corner of her living room. "Sorry about the mess," she said, though the place didn't look messy, just odd. There were no personal touches, no photos, no books, no knickknacks. Just bare walls and mismatched furniture. She poured us each a glass of red wine from a half-empty bottle on the counter, and we settled onto the couch. At first, it was fine. We kept chatting, laughing, and swapping stories. But then, about 20 minutes in, the front door creaked open. I froze. Lily's face went pale. A man stepped inside. He was huge, easily over 6 feet tall, with a thick beard and broad shoulders that filled the doorway. He wore a flannel shirt and jeans, and his dark eyes locked onto me immediately. His expression was a mix of confusion and anger, like he couldn't decide whether to yell or hit something. "Who the hell is this?" he demanded, his voice low and sharp. I glanced at Lily, expecting her to explain. But she just sat there, silent, tears welling up in her eyes. My stomach dropped. "I think I should go," I said quickly, standing up and grabbing my jacket. The man took a step closer, blocking the doorway. "Yeah, I think you should," he said, his voice rising. "Now." I didn't argue. I grabbed my phone from the coffee table and bolted past him, my heart pounding. As I raced down the hallway, I half expected him to follow me, but when I glanced back, the door had already slammed shut. I didn't stop running until I reached the main street, where I flagged down the first cab I saw. As I sat in the back seat, catching my breath, I replayed the night over and over in my head, trying to piece together what had just happened. Who's that guy? Her ex? Her roommate? And why hadn't she warned me? Always trust your gut instinct. Was I thinking? The soft glow of my phone screen was the only light in the room, casting faint shadows on the sheets tangled around my legs. It was one of those late nights when you're too tired to do anything productive but too restless to sleep. My finger hovered over the dating app icon on my home screen before I tapped it, almost on autopilot. I wasn't looking for anything serious that night, not really. My boyfriend at the time was fast asleep next to me, snoring softly, oblivious to my scrolling. That probably makes me sound terrible, but it wasn't like that. Our relationship was already teetering on the edge, and I was just bored. Restless. Curious about what else might be out there. That's when I saw him, Rick. His profile picture wasn't like the others. No shirtless bathroom selfies, no group shots where you can't tell which guy is which. Just a simple photo of him sitting at a cafe, wearing a green flannel and round glasses, his salt and pepper hair swept back in a way that made him look more like a quirky professor than someone trolling dating apps. The bio underneath caught my eye immediately. Just a 47-year-old wizard trapped in the modern world. It was ridiculous, but it made me laugh. I swiped right, and to my surprise, it was an instant match. His first message came through almost immediately. "Do you believe in magic?" Looking back, I wish I'd ignored it. But at the time, it felt harmless. Charming, even. I typed back a quick reply. "Only when it's done well." We started chatting from there, and honestly, it was one of the most engaging conversations I'd had in months. Rick had this way of talking that made everything sound like it belonged in a fantasy novel. He didn't just ask how my day was. He'd ask if I'd slain any metaphorical dragons or uncovered any hidden treasures. It was silly, sure, but it also made me smile. Within a week, Rick had wormed his way into my daily routine. We'd text first thing in the morning and late into the night. He wasn't pushy, just persistent in a way that felt flattering at the time. He asked about my favorite books, the music I listened to, even my childhood dreams. He made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. But there were red flags, even early on. I just didn't see them for what they were. For one thing, Rick was intense. He'd send paragraphs of text at a time, filled with flowery language and metaphors that often didn't make sense. He'd talk about boundaries and how important they were to him, but then he'd immediately cross them by asking deeply personal questions. "Tell me about your biggest regret." He once texted at 2 a.m., no small talk. "I want to know the real you." At the time, I thought it was refreshing, like he was cutting through the superficial crap most people stuck to. Now I realize it was just his way of testing how much control he could exert over the conversation, and by extension over me. We hadn't even met in person yet when he started pushing for more. He wanted phone calls, video chats, anything that would bring us closer. I agreed to a few calls, and they were odd. Rick had this deep, gravelly voice that didn't match the whimsical tone of his texts. On the phone, he was quieter, almost hesitant, but still intense in a way I couldn't quite put my finger on. He'd say things like, "I feel like I've known you in another life," or, "You're the only person who really gets me." It was flattering, sure, but also overwhelming. Then came the first major red flag. Rick asked me to follow his ex-wife. It came out of nowhere during one of our late-night phone calls. He said they were going through a divorce, and that she was being difficult. He claimed she was hiding things from him, money, assets, who knows what, and that he needed someone on the outside to keep an eye on her. "You're perfect for this," he said, his tone casual, like he was asking me to grab coffee, not stalk a stranger. "She doesn't know you, so she wouldn't suspect anything." I froze, unsure if he was joking or not. When I tried to laugh it off, he didn't join in. "I'm serious," he said, and there was a sharp edge to his voice that made my stomach twist. "You'd be doing me a huge favor." I told him no, of course, but the fact that he even asked should have been enough for me to cut things off right then and there. Instead, I stayed. Part of me thought I could handle him, that I was strong enough to keep him at arm's length. Another part of me, if I'm being honest, was flattered by his obsession. It felt nice to be wanted, even if it came with strings attached. The second red flag came not long after. Rick was a Scientologist. He didn't bring it up right away, but when he did, it was with the same casualness he used for everything else. He mentioned he was involved in something bigger, and that it gave his life purpose. When I pressed him on it, he admitted he'd been a member of the Church of Scientology for over a decade. "I'm not one of the crazy ones," he said quickly, as if reading my mind. "I just use it as a tool for self-improvement." He never tried to recruit me, but he did invite me to a few sessions. "You don't have to do anything," he said. "Just come and observe. Moral support, you know." I said no, of course, but the invitations kept coming. Every time I declined, he'd get this wounded tone in his voice, like I was personally rejecting him. "I just thought you'd be open-minded," he said once, and the words stung more than they should have. Despite all this, I kept talking to him. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want to admit I'd made a mistake. Maybe I liked the attention. Or maybe I just wanted to prove to myself that I could handle him, that I wasn't as naive as my friends always joked I was. But then came the night I gave him my location. It was late, and I was sitting in my car outside a friend's house, scrolling through my phone while waiting for her to finish getting ready. Rick texted, asking where I was. Without thinking, I sent him my location, assuming he just wanted to know what part of town I was in. 5 minutes later, he showed up. I hadn't even told him I was free, let alone invited him over. But there he was, pulling up on a beat-up moped like he was in some kind of rom-com. He hopped off, grinning like this was the most romantic thing in the world. "I had to see you," he said, walking up to my car. It felt like fate. I should have driven away right then. Instead, I rolled down my window and asked, "What are you doing here?" "I wanted to make sure you were real," he said, leaning in closer. Before I could react, he kissed me, hard, messy, and completely uninvited. I jerked back, my heart racing, but he just laughed like it was no big deal. "See," he said, stepping back. "Now I know you're not a hologram." I stared at him, stunned into silence. Before I could say anything, he turned his attention to my friend, who had just stepped out onto the porch. She was 17 at the time, still in high school, and Rick immediately started chatting her up like they were old friends. "You want a ride?" he asked, gesturing to his moped. To my horror, she said yes. I watched in stunned silence as he gave her a quick ride around the block, my stomach churning the entire time. When they came back, he helped her off the moped like he was some kind of gentleman, then turned to me with a smug grin. "I like her," he said, like it was some kind of compliment. "She's got good energy." That was the moment I realized Rick wasn't just quirky or intense, he was dangerous. Part 2 of the previous story with the nightmare that was Rick. When Rick left that night, I was shaking. My friend, oblivious to the tension, waved him off like he was just another harmless guy. I didn't have the words to explain it to her. How wrong it felt, how every instinct in my body was screaming that this wasn't normal. I just stood there on the porch, trying to steady my breathing as his taillight disappeared down the street. "You okay?" my friend asked, tilting her head in concern. "Yeah," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just tired. I didn't sleep that night." I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my mind. The kiss, his sudden appearance, the way he handed my little sister's number to himself in his head, like it was his right. A part of me wanted to believe it was all harmless, just Rick being Rick, a bit eccentric, a bit overbearing, but not dangerous. But another part of me, the part that felt like my chest was in a vice, knew better. The next morning, I decided to cut him off for good. I blocked his number, deleted his messages, and made a mental note to avoid the places he might hang out. I thought that would be the end of it, but Rick wasn't the kind of person who took no for an answer. It started with texts from unknown numbers. At first, they were sporadic, just a "hey, it's Rick. Can we talk?" here and there. I ignored them, hoping he'd take the hint. But they didn't stop. If anything, they got worse. By the end of the week, I was getting messages every few hours. "I know you're seeing this. Please don't ignore me. I just want to talk. Why are you being like this? You owe me an explanation." The tone of the messages shifted quickly, from pleading to accusatory to outright hostile. One night, I woke up to a string of messages that made my blood run cold. "I know where you live. You can't just block me and pretend I don't exist. I thought you were better than this." I blocked each new number as it came, but it didn't matter. Rick kept finding ways to contact me. He messaged me on social media, emailed me from burner accounts, even reached out to mutual acquaintances, asking them to put in a good word for him. I started to feel like I was being hunted. A few weeks later, I was home alone one evening when I heard a knock at the door. My stomach dropped. It was late, too late for visitors, and I hadn't ordered anything. I crept to the peephole, my heart hammering in my chest. It was Rick. He stood there on the porch, his hands shoved into the pockets of his coat, rocking slightly on his heels like he was trying to appear casual. But his eyes were locked on the door, unblinking, like he could see straight through it. "Come on," he called, his voice muffled but unmistakable. "I know you're in there." I backed away from the door, my mind racing. Should I call the police? Would he leave if I stayed quiet? The thought of confronting him made my skin crawl, but the idea of him standing out there all night was somehow worse. "Just let me in," he said, his voice louder this time. "We need to talk." I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering my address to the operator as quietly as I could. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line and keep the door locked. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me, my hands trembling as I clutched the phone. Rick knocked again, harder this time. "I know you're mad, but this is stupid," he said, his voice rising. "You think blocking me is going to solve anything? You think I'm just going to go away?" The sound of his fist pounding against the door echoed through the house. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to make myself as small as possible. The dispatcher's voice in my ear was calm, reassuring, but it felt distant, like she was speaking to me from the other side of a tunnel. "Stay where you are," she said. "Officers are on their way." The minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Rick kept yelling, alternating between anger and desperation. One moment he was shouting about how unfair I was being. The next he was begging me to open the door, promising he just wanted to talk. And then suddenly it was quiet. I held my breath, straining to hear any sound from the other side of the door. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. I waited, counting the seconds, until finally, I heard the faint sound of a car engine starting. I peeked through the curtains just in time to see his moped pulling away from the curb. The police arrived a few minutes later. I showed them the messages, told them about his visit, and filed a report. They assured me they'd follow up, but there wasn't much they could do without a direct threat. "Just let us know if he comes back," one of the officers said. I nodded, but I didn't feel reassured. Rick might have left that night, but I knew it wasn't over. For the next few weeks, I lived in a constant state of fear. I started looking over my shoulder every time I left the house, jumping at shadows and flinching at sudden noises. I changed my routine, took different routes to work, and stopped going out alone. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that Rick was watching me. And then one night, I found proof. I was leaving work late, the parking lot nearly empty, when I noticed something on my car. At first, I thought it was just a piece of trash, but as I got closer, I realized it was a note. It was scrawled on a torn piece of paper, the handwriting messy and uneven. "You can't hide from me forever." My hands shook as I read it. I scanned the parking lot, half expecting to see Rick lurking in the shadows, but it was empty. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I called the police again, and this time they took things more seriously. The officer I spoke to recommended getting a restraining order, and I agreed. But even as I filed the paperwork, I couldn't help but wonder if a piece of paper would really be enough to stop him. The final straw came a week later. I was home alone again, curled up on the couch with a blanket and a cup of tea, trying to distract myself with a movie. The house was quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the TV. And then I heard it, a soft tapping at the window. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The tapping came again, louder this time, and I turned to see Rick's face pressed against the glass. His eyes were wild, his hair disheveled, and his mouth twisted into a manic grin. "Let me in," he said, his voice muffled by the glass. "I just want to talk." I bolted from the couch, grabbing my phone as I ran to the bedroom. I locked the door and dialed 911, my fingers fumbling on the screen. The operator's voice was calm, but I could barely hear her over the sound of my own heartbeat. "He's at my window," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Please send someone." Rick's voice carried through the house, muffled but still audible. "I know you're in there," he called. "You can't ignore me forever." I stayed on the line with the dispatcher until I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. Rick must have heard them too, because the shouting stopped. By the time the police arrived, he was gone. That was the last time I saw Rick. The police managed to track him down a few days later, and he was arrested for violating the restraining order. I don't know what happened to him after that. I didn't want to know.